So I've already taken this out of the package. I've done a quick glance at it to remove any sort of connective tissue from the bone, such as this. That stuff's real chewy, real gristly, you wouldn't want to eat that. And I'm discarding that. And if you look on the other side, this side looks pretty good. Not much there that we're gonna mess with right now. As we cut it, we'll trim it if we need to. So, to do this, I'm going to be using my butcher's knife and just a small paring knife that I'm makeshifting into a trim knife. You don't need fancy knives to cut anything. They just need to be sharp, which these knives are. So this is what we call the small cap end. This end of the chuck roll actually is attached to the ribeye. So this very first cut, if you wanted a ribeye steak that was a little fattier, you could use this. And right there is your ribeye. If I was to take that cap off, that would be the ribeye, the button and everything. And like I said, that's a good cheap steak. However, I'm not doing that. I'm just gonna have the steak, or the roast, I mean. And as I go, I'll not cut them as thick. This first cut is thicker because the piece isn't as big, but as we get further into it, they'll get less and less thick. So I usually stick between 2.5 inches to 1.5 inches. So here we go. And nice, pretty steak, good marbling. This piece of meat came from Costco. That's who I typically like to use. And I'm not being paid by anybody, so I can say whatever I want.
Would you cut off this, like, epic white?
No, you don't trim that part out. Not for a roast.
Oh, okay.
But something like this, where it's wanting to kind of dangle off anyway, I am gonna take that off and put it over there. That'll be for my stew beef cleanup. Now, as you can see, the roast is getting bigger. So what we'll do is we'll loosen it up like this. And the most important thing is to go all the way down to your cutting board with every stroke. And that's how you get these pretty clean cuts. You can kind of see where I've kind of had my little sawing motion right here, but you don't want to try to do like this. You want your cut to be all the way down, and you want the knife to be doing the work and your hands and wrists just guiding the blade. Now, like here, even for a roast, this is excessive fat here, so I will trim that off.
You probably told me this before, but what is, like, that?
That's a vein. Okay, so now that the roast is getting like that, we can kind of see how it's taking shape. I'm not even going to want this in my roast. I'm just going to take this whole part, this whole top part off, and I'll turn that into stew beef in a minute. So we'll just set that off to the side for now. And now we'll go back to a thicker cut here. And you can tie these if you want to. To do that, you just need some butcher cord, which you can get at any grocery store. And I'll go ahead and tie this last part up. Now, I'm left-handed, so all you right-handed people may not be able to follow me, but I'll try my best to explain. You go underneath your meat and you pull up and back. Now, using these two fingers, you run your string parallel. Then you just turn your wrist over, tuck your string in. Come on, you can do it. There we go. and you make a little slip knot. You pull it tight and see how it's pulling that meat all up nice and round. That's what you want to do. You don't want to go too tight because if you do, when you go to cut, that string's going to snap and it's not going to hold anyway, and you're going to have to retie the whole thing.
Why do you have to tie it anyway?
It helps with making a more even cooking roast.
Oh.
Now you wouldn't want to tie if you hadn't already trimmed. So if you have not already trimmed the piece of meat, do so before you tie. Otherwise, you're just gonna have to go back, undo your tie in order to trim. And trimming is completely optional anyway, but I like to. So before I do this last cut, I'm gonna take this part off because I can tell it's gonna be stew beef anyway, or beef chunks I should say. And I'm gonna go ahead and do my final cut. This just makes it look nice and even, which there again will help it cook even. But don't discard that meat. There's nothing wrong with it. It's still good meat. At the end of my string again here. And once again, string parallel, fold your wrist over, tuck the string in, pull, and then holding the long end that's still connected to your roll of twine, you just pull that and it'll tighten that knot up. And then give it a gentle push, and then one more knot to secure your slip knot. That way it won't move on you. And that is how you tie. Very simple. Now if I've done it right, which we'll see when I make this cut, actually I'm gonna put one more string. When I make this last cut, it'll all hold everything together. And then when I go to cook this roast, the meat will cook evenly. It won't be overdone on one side or the other.
And it looks like it would also help, like, if you're trying to, like, cut it into cubes or something, like, as a guide, maybe.
As my daughter was saying, you can do this if you want to space your steaks out. That's not unheard of. So it's also not entirely necessary. But if you're new starting off and you want to kind of get an idea of how thick things are going to be, that is something you can do. This is also, if you're a big rib roast person, you'll separate the ribs from the roast and then you'll tie the ribs back while cooking to make a more flavorful rib roast. Just if you've tied, be a little bit gentler on your last cut. That just helps make sure that those strings stay tied on. And that looks like this. So if you were to compare these roasts that are tied with the roasts that are not tied, you can kind of see the difference. So there you have it. Now we'll move on to our trim work. This is really simple. All this meat is going to be good for is either grinding or stew beef. Stew beef is exactly what it sounds like. It's just beef chunks that a lot of people like to use for stew. But you can really use it for anything. Beef stroganoff, even beef tacos if you're inclined to do so. Pretty much whatever your creative heart desires. And even though this is going to be cut into chunks, it still is important to kind of give it a look over, because you don't want any sort of gristly anything in these. So like that silver skin right there, that's not going to taste very good. It's not going to cook very good. So you want to go ahead and get rid of that. And you can cut your chunks into whatever size fits your cooking needs. I typically do about 1.5 to 2 inch cubes.
There's like a part on it that kind of looks like a bruise. Like,
which part?
Like, it was on one of these. I don't know which one it was.
You'll see that sometimes, and typically that's clotting. That's just where the animal has clotted, whether it be from an injury right before slaughter or during the slaughtering process. This piece here again, where it was connected to bone, definitely want to get that off. You don't want to try to serve that to anybody. So one of the benefits to buying meat this way and cutting it up yourself is you take on the responsibility for the waste. So that typically will lessen the price that you have to pay. So if you know what you're doing, you're going to come out ahead because you're not going to throw away as much as other people might. And you also don't have to pay the price to have a so-called expert at your local grocery store do the cutting or some big packing company. But it is important to have a way to utilize everything. So you don't want to just take like this meat here and throw it in the trash. Like I said, if you have a grinder, whether it be a tabletop grinder or an attachment for a KitchenAid mixer like I have, you can use that to, increase your usable meat or yield if you want to be real technical. And all of those are fine. But this piece here, so it was wound out to be about $1 per pound cheaper than just buying the roast already cut up. And as you can see, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 roast out of it. So average roast is going to be 3 pounds or so, $1 per pound cheaper, saving me about $30 doing this, if you include the price of the stew beef. The stew beef or beef chunks is going to be more expensive than the roast typically because they can use a lot of different cuts for that, so they put that all into their price. They're not going to have just a beef chuck making up their stew beef in the grocery store or their beef chunks. They'll have maybe a round roast or some sort of a steak cut like a ribeye or a New York strip or even tenderloin if they have a new meat cutter that made some mistakes. There again, can't stress enough, just even though you're not going to be cooking this part as a roast, you still don't want to let it go untrimmed. You do want to trim it. And a lot of times I will go back even right before I cook something. So I don't know if y'all can tell, that's where the vacuum seal at the processing plant kind of cooked the meat a little bit right there. You definitely want to cut that part off. That doesn't taste very good. It tastes freezer burnt, so you definitely want to get rid of that. But I'll typically go back through and anything that I may have missed in the initial cutting because I'm in a hurry, wanting to do whatever.
This is like the bruising that I was talking about.
Watch your finger if you value it. And you don't have to try to get every single piece of red meat out of there. It's up to you how much you want to dig around and how much you want to try to salvage. And that's different for everybody. Remember, you're not trying to make money on this, you're trying to feed your family. So if you're okay with throwing a little bit away, then that's fine with me too. But as you can tell, I'm not really making a lot of long cuts here. I'm just trying to cut down to where I feel that fat and kind of give the meat a little tug, and that'll kind of separate it from there. So almost done here. Got this little bit to dig out right here. And safety wise too, I've been cutting meat a while. I'm not worried about cutting myself. However, sometimes it does happen. You can invest in a chainmail glove if that's something that you think you're going to be doing a lot of. And it will help if you have that. You will not cut yourself. It'll feel kind of funny, but you won't cut yourself. But definitely don't be trying to go so fast that you don't pay attention, because if you cut yourself and bleed all over this meat, well, guess what you're not going to get to do with any of it? Keep it. Unless you don't mind serving your family, a dose of A negative or B positive or whatever you might be. So just keep that in mind. Don't go so fast that you cut yourself. There again, sharp knives are the best for cutting meat. If your knife is sharp, it's much safer. You don't have to fight with the meat as much. So make sure your knife is sharp. It will be helpful, not just because it makes it easier to cut the meat, but because if you're not fighting with it to cut it, you're not going to have to put your hand in harm's way.
This is a lot more intricate than Cookie Mama does it.
There again, these are just beef chunks. Nothing special about that. But they are very useful. Sometimes if I don't have enough time to cook the whole roast, I don't have couple hours to spend, I'll get the beef chunks out and use those instead. And that'll go a lot faster. I do want to show y'all this. This is a lot of connective tissue. If you're going to pressure cook that'll cook down. You should be fine. But if you're wanting to do any kind of sauteing or braising, things like that, this probably would not be good. So you probably would not want to use that for those things. You'd want something leaner that doesn't have that connective tissue in it. There again, you'll know your cooking needs way more than I will. And so I'm just showing you what I do. And there is one other cut that I will talk about real quick once I finish this up. You can do with that piece I just showed, if I would have cut that top off, I could have done boneless short ribs with it. There again, not something my family eats, but that is something, that you can do. A lot of people like to do boneless short ribs. But as I explained, because they're boneless and there's a lot of connective tissue there, braising's not the best thing for that. So I don't think it's a very valuable cut, but who am I to judge? All right, and lastly, if I had wanted to with this meat, I could have cut these much thinner, 3/4 of an inch, 1/2 inch, something like that, and that would have given me chuck steaks, which are also really good if you marinate them, put them on the grill, stuff like that. They're very, very good. Just not something that we're going to eat a lot of in the fall time. So that is our tutorial. I'm going to pack this up, get it in my freezer. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Invest in gloves. They keep your hands from getting all meaty. All right. Thanks, y'all.